Hello, welcome to Sound and Fairy Book Reviews. As usual, I am Tina. Today I'm doing a book review of Aria of the Forgotten, Book 1, Bloodletting, by Sean Thomas. This is the second book I read in full for the SPSFC3, which is the self-published science fiction competition. What follows is a full review, and then at the end I'll talk about what rating I'm giving it for the competition itself. With its engaging story and sympathetic characters, Aria of the Forgotten uses its sci-fi setting to make a compelling and poignant argument about racism and xenophobia. What is it about? The planet Cerulia, once a military and economic superpower, is in crisis. Reactionary bigots control the government. A vicious private military organization occupies the poorest sections of its cities. The threat of galactic war looms ever larger, and a raging drug epidemic fueled by a cheap, highly addictive narcotic called blood splice claims thousands of lives a day. Amidst this turmoil, private investigator Ravina Moss is hired by a grieving mother named Harolak to look into the death of her son, a university dropout and blood spice addict. His death was ruled an accidental overdose, but suspicious bruises on his wrists and neck give Hellenic reason to believe he was murdered. The investigation leads Ravina to the most dangerous corners of the galaxy and forces her to confront her identity as a Forgotten. Racially mixed and rumored to possess preternatural abilities, most Forgotten were hunted down and killed by a fanatical theocratic government years ago. As Ravina plunges deeper into the investigation, she realizes the case goes far beyond a single murder. With the help of an unlikely source, she uncovers proof of a ghastly crime shocking in its scope and cruelty. Now she must risk her life to expose this insidious plot before millions of innocent men, women, and children suffer a horrifying fate. This book is a well-written, compelling, and deadly serious sci-fi that has a definitive goal. At least that's how I interpreted it. In this sense, it carries a sort of 1984 Fahrenheit 451 concept that sci-fi can and should be used to raise issues relevant to today, or as a warning for the future. Now, before I get started, I mentioned racism before, but in truth it's speciesism, but because this book is an allegory of racism in our own world, at least as I said, as I interpreted it, I'm going to just say racism. In terms of characters, the novel mainly follows Ravina, an ex-cop and private investigator with a traumatic past on multiple levels. She's grieving, very lonely, and alcoholic, and while she's fearless, it comes from a clear lack of interest in her own survival. She just doesn't care anymore about her own life. She does risky things to get to the bottom of a crime because solving the mystery is the only thing that she's living for, basically. In this sense, she's a very vulnerable, easily sympathize with character that you definitely root for. The other characters are well-rounded and interesting as well, both the supporting good characters and the villains. I loved, I can't remember his name, the Bokosian, only good cop in the city. That guy was awesome. I was never unclear about anyone's motivations or goals, whether they were villains or protagonists. The characters were excellent in truth, and I cared about them. The story, while long, has a pretty straightforward trajectory. It's a detective story, essentially, but one with a very obvious message. The twist at the end wasn't a surprise, though I'm not sure it was supposed to be. And, unfortunately, the novel had a tendency to make things too easy for Ravina clue-wise. Quite a few times she would enter a place without any leads at all, and the first person she talks to would have just the information she needed to move forward. There were no real red herrings in this book. It was just a bit too convenient. It felt like Ravina was heading towards an obvious conclusion, than the novel being a true mystery. Now, while I'm entirely on board with the message, said message is kind of heavy-handed. It's possible this is because I follow anti-racism discourse and share what I believe are the sentiments of the author about xenophobia, colonialism, and systemic racism, and how the latter is used to keep marginalized groups disadvantaged. But, from an objective point of view, narrative structure-wise, the book is far too didactic in its approach. He does a fantastic job making you care about the Bokosians, mainly in describing horrific violence and prejudice perpetrated against them by governmental programs, police, and your everyday racists, violence similar to events in our own world, as well as opioid addiction and subpar healthcare systems. But the story at times drifts from a story into an argument. It's an important message, undoubtedly. I just found that it was so obvious at times that it loses some of its punch. I guess maybe it could be just me. Maybe I just like something a bit more subtle, but yeah. It might also relate to the depiction of the aliens. Aside from obvious physical characteristics, the Bokosians being reptilioid, the Forgotten having wings and jet black skin, etc., the alienness of these people is very surface level, making them feel like obvious stand-ins for marginalized groups, victims of genocide in our world, as opposed to, extraterrestrials who have their own culture and background. Aside from a few minor things, nothing about the characters felt particularly alien. Once in a while, Ravina's wings would twitch, but that was really about it. As such, despite there being several different species of alien in the book, They all felt a bit homogenous, like humans with face paint on. The technology, government systems, the way that the city was laid out, this all felt very human. I often forgot I was reading about aliens, to be completely honest. Yet, the story is very compelling and the tension is through the freaking roof. The book needs some content warnings for race based violence, murder, drug overdose, torture, police brutality, and child death, though. In truth, I needed a light read chaser after reading this book because it's incredibly heavy. Is this a bad thing, though? Of course not. You don't really get the kind of themes of the book from the cover, unfortunately. So I figured I'd mention it. Overall, though, the book was very well done. I'm very glad to have read it. It was a harrowing tale, really, and I really liked Ravina, and I thought she was badass, and yeah. Onwards to the SPSC part of the review. As I said last time, to get to 10 points, I'm rating world building, plot, characters, and writing out of 2.5, and then 1 point for the subjective aspects, if there is one. The characters I'm giving a 2.5, as I thought they were fantastic and relatable. The world building, because of how unalien the aliens felt, I'm giving a 1. The plot is getting 1.5 because of the convenience factor and how the message sometimes overtook the story. And the writing, because this is a competition, I'm giving a 2, as there were moments of head hopping that were a bit confusing. Now, while I found the message heavy-handed, I think the author approaching these themes was absolutely commendable, so I'm giving him the 1 extra point. And I'm also doing it because of reptile aliens, because I love reptile aliens. So I'm giving this book an 8 out of 10. I'll be throwing reviews on Goodreads and etc. later too. So thank you for watching.